Hello everyone. This presentation is about neighbourhood emissions profiles as part of the Green and Thriving Neighbourhoods initiative and forms an introduction to integrated and sustainable design. My name is Olivia Bedworth and I work as a climate and sustainability consultant at Arup. Today we're going to talk about the process for creating and maintaining a neighbourhood emissions profile and show how it can be used to inform decision making. Part 1, Introduction and Unit Overview. It is vital that global emissions fall quickly and permanently. Neighbourhoods are complex systems and a green and thriving neighbourhood must be supported by a robust evidence-based emissions assessment. An emissions profile can be developed for a new or an existing neighbourhood. Although it starts as an informed estimate, the emissions profile is a strategic decision-making tool, providing a pathway towards net zero. It can also become a monitoring tool that provides transparency on progress and supports net zero claims or publicity. This module will explain the process for creating and maintaining a neighbourhood emissions profile and show how it can be used to inform decision making. This unit focuses on 3 main learning objectives. Learning Objective 1. Recognise the importance of an emissions profile. Since the emissions profile will show the scale of reduction required to reach net zero, it should be complete, consistent and accurate. Learning Objective 2. Understand the process for creating and maintaining an emissions profile. The emissions profile is a quantified assessment and it should be created early on and improved over time as decisions are made and more data becomes available. Learning Objective 3. Learn how the emissions profile is used to guide decision making. The emissions profile can be used to test options, then also to track progress, helping the neighbourhood reach its net zero targets. Part 2, Strategies. Given the importance of the emissions profile for neighbourhood projects, there are several principles to producing a high quality assessment. Number 1, relevance. Number 2, completeness. Number 3, consistency. Number 4, transparency. And number 5, accuracy. Relevance is about ensuring the emissions are directly attributable to this neighbourhood. Completeness is about accounting for and reporting all emission sources within the neighbourhood boundary. Any exclusions must be disclosed and justified. Consistency is about using consistent methodologies to compare emissions over time. Any changes to the data, boundary or methods must be transparently documented as they occur. Transparency is about documenting data and processes clearly so that auditors and the public may evaluate its credibility. Accuracy is about achieving sufficient accuracy to enable users to make decisions with reasonable assurance. Where uncertainty is high, conservative values and assumptions should be used. A net zero neighbourhood will require a clear and complete understanding of emissions occurring within the neighbourhood boundary. For neighbourhood scale projects, it is helpful to consider these 3 categories: operational, embodied and consumption-based emissions. Operational emissions occur continually throughout the lifetime of the neighbourhood. They are measured on an annual basis and include emissions due to energy used in buildings, public spaces and transportation, or emissions arising from processing waste. Embodied emissions are in the materials and construction processes of buildings and infrastructure, including new construction, retrofits and redevelopment. All embodied emissions should be assessed, including those due to material extraction, manufacturing, assembly, maintenance, repairs, replacements, deconstruction, demolition, and any associated transport, waste and end-of-life impacts. Embodied emissions only occur at specific points through the development cycle. Historic embodied emissions in existing buildings and infrastructure do not need to be included in the assessment, although any future embodied emissions should be captured. Consumption-based emissions are the impact of people in a neighbourhood, buying food or clothes, travelling on holiday, or investing in new technology. All lifestyle choices have an emissions impact, and the neighbourhood should focus on delivering tangible and ambitious actions to reduce consumption-based emissions. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol for communities is the standard that should be used for reporting neighbourhood emissions. Aligning with this standard, the emissions profile can be created and maintained by following these steps. Step 1. Define the boundary. The geographic boundary of the neighbourhood defines which emissions sources and activities should be included in the net zero emissions assessment. Step 2. Identify emissions sources. It is important that all operational and embodied emissions within the boundary are included. There will be other emissions from the consumption activity of residents, workers and visitors. Consider including these emissions too. Step 3. Calculate emissions using the neighbourhood strategies. Use industry benchmarks for both construction and operational emissions, based on building type and materials. Where possible, refer to local measured data or precedents. Adjust the benchmark data to reflect the neighbourhood strategies. Step 4. Construct the emissions profile using the development schedule. Use the development schedule to create a time series of annual emissions. Account for the impact of future policy requirements or industry standards on emissions. Step 5. Create a plan. Agree a plan to regularly update the emissions profile. In operation, use monitored data to calculate the annual operational emissions. Post-construction, recalculate embodied emissions using actual material quantities and environmental product declarations. Neighbourhoods should work with stakeholders to agree target dates. There are 2 targets. Net zero operational is achieved when the annual operational emissions are either reduced to 0 or completely offset. This should be reassessed each year. Net zero embodied is achieved when the total embodied emissions are completely offset. This is calculated over the life cycle of the development. It is important that offsets are only counted towards either the operational or the embodied target to avoid double counting. Once constructed, the emissions profile is a tool to test design options, strategic interventions, and citizen action. The impact on different neighbourhood strategies can be evaluated and compared against the current baseline and the net zero targets. The emissions profile is particularly useful for demonstrating the trade-off between embodied and operational emissions over the life cycle of the development. For example, it can be used to justify more carbon-intensive construction for the sake of reducing annual energy consumption. Part 3. Conclusion. To sum up, the presentation provided these 3 specific insights. Number 1. Set requirements for a complete, consistent, and accurate neighbourhood emissions profile. Number 2. Create examples and share data to help neighbourhoods develop robust emissions profiles. Number 3. Require the emissions profile to be regularly updated and used to justify key decisions.